Every empath goes through these 3 life phases. Phase 2 breaks most people. What if everything you thought was a personal flaw, the exhaustion, the overwhelm, the slow retreat from everyone you once loved, was never a flaw at all? What if it was a system, a precise, invisible psychological sequence that every empath moves through, whether they understand it or not? And what if the reason most of them never recover from the middle of it isn't because they're too sensitive, but because no one ever showed them the architecture of what was actually happening inside them? That's what this is about. Because here's the truth most people miss. Empaths don't just feel more than other people. They process reality differently at a structural level. And because of that, they don't just live life the way other people live it. They move through a very specific progression. 3 distinct phases, each one more psychologically intense than the last. And the second one, the one right in the middle, that's where most of them disappear. Not physically, but something in them goes quiet. Something that used to be there stops showing up. And the people around them watch this happen and call it depression or burnout or being distant. But those words don't capture what's actually occurring beneath the surface. What's actually occurring is a complete destabilization of a psychological system that was never built to survive what it was asked to survive. This is not emotional, it's structural. And once you see it, once you understand the 3 phases, not as personal experiences, but as a predictable map, you stop being lost inside them. You start seeing yourself from the outside. You start understanding why you feel what you feel, why you changed the way you changed, why the person you are right now is so different from the person you were 5 years ago, and why that difference isn't loss, it's architecture. So let's go back to the beginning. Phase 1 doesn't feel like a phase when you're in it. It feels like just being alive. You wake up and the world is immediate, louder than it should be, richer than other people seem to notice, full of signals that only you appear to be receiving. Someone across the room shifts their energy, and you feel it before you see it. A conversation ends, and you carry the emotional residue of it for hours. You walk into a space, and before anyone speaks, you already know what kind of space it is, tense or sad or performing happiness. This is what people call being an empath. But what's actually happening is something more specific than that. Your nervous system has an unusually low threshold for emotional signal detection. You are registering information that other people's systems simply filter out as noise. And in phase 1, this doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like a gift. It feels like depth, like connection, like you are more alive than most. And because of that feeling, you build your entire identity around it. You become the listener, the one people come to, the one who understands with needing explanations. You absorb other people's pain, not because you choose to, but because your system is designed to. You don't know how to stand in front of someone's suffering without pulling it into yourself. You don't have the architecture for distance. Not yet. Because in phase 1, that distance feels like cruelty. It feels like betrayal. It feels like becoming someone colder than you believe yourself to be. And so you stay open, wide open, all the time, to everyone. But what most people don't realize is that this openness has a cost that doesn't bill you immediately. It accumulates, silently, the way debt accumulates when you're not watching the statement. You give and absorb and carry and hold, and give again and absorb again. And ledger doesn't show a deficit yet. You still feel whole. You still feel purposeful. You still feel like this is who you are and this is what you're here to do. This is the psychology of phase 1. Identity fusion with the empathic gift. You are not someone who happens to be empathic. You are your empathy. It defines your relationships, your self-worth, your reason for being needed. And being needed feels like being loved. For a very long time, the two things feel identical. The relationships you build in phase 1 have a specific quality to them. They are deep quickly, unusually deep, because you are offering something most people have never been offered before. To be truly felt, truly seen, without judgment. And people respond to that. They open, they trust, they lean in, and you receive their leaning not as weight, not yet, but as intimacy, as proof that you matter, as evidence that your gift is real. But there's a pattern forming beneath the surface of every one of these relationships that you cannot see while you're inside them. The pattern is this: you are almost always the container. Other people bring their chaos, their pain, their confusion, and you hold it, you process it. You help them reorganize it into something livable. And then they leave the conversation lighter, and you are left carrying everything they put down. You don't name this yet. You don't have language for it. You just feel, periodically, a strange tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, a subtle hollowness that comes after the intimacy fades. But you explain it away. You tell yourself you're just an introvert who needs recovery time. You tell yourself this is the price of caring deeply. You tell yourself everyone feels this way. They don't. And this is where the system begins to show its first crack. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a hairline fracture in the architecture of who you thought you were and what you thought this gift was costing you. The crack is this: you are beginning, very, very slowly, to recognize a pattern. Not consciously, not in words. But somewhere below your awareness, your system is starting to catalog data. It's noticing that certain people take more than others, that certain interactions leave you more drained than others, that certain environments strip something from you that takes days to replenish. Your pattern recognition threshold is activating, and this is not the beginning of wisdom. Not yet. This is the beginning of the end of phase 1. Because once a system that's sensitive starts to recognize pattern, once the data begins to accumulate beyond the threshold your subconscious can quietly manage, the entire architecture shifts. And you move, whether you want to or not, into the second phase. This is where everything changes. Phase 2 doesn't announce itself. It arrives like weather. You look up one day and realize the sky is different without knowing exactly when it changed. You are still the same person. You still feel everything. You still carry the empathic sensitivity that has defined you your entire life. But something has been added to the system, something that wasn't there before. A kind of awareness that you cannot unfeel once it arrives. You have started to see the dynamic, not just sense it, not just feel it as vague discomfort. You have started to see it with a clarity that is both clarifying and devastating at the same time. You see who gives and who takes. You see who reaches out only when they are in pain and goes quiet when they are fine. You see who tells you they love you and then disappears when you need something back. You see the architecture of every relationship you are in, the invisible structure beneath the warmth, and for the first time, you cannot unsee it. And here's what makes phase 2 the one that breaks most people. Seeing clearly is supposed to help. It's supposed to liberate you. That's what wisdom is supposed to do. But for an empath, the moment you begin to see clearly is also the moment you enter the most profound internal conflict of your life, because you feel everything, and now you also to everything. And what you feel and what you know are not saying the same thing. You know that this person is using you. You feel that they need you. You know that this relationship is not reciprocal. You feel responsible for their well-being anyway. You know that walking away would be right. You feel like walking away would make you a monster. This is the conflict at the center of phase 2. Not between you and the people in your life, but between your perception and your feeling. Between the part of you that is waking up and the part of you that built its entire identity on being open, on being needed, on being the one who stays. Because you are an empath, because your entire system is wired toward absorbing rather than deflecting, your default response to this conflict is not to resolve it, it's to intensify, to try harder, to give more, to open wider. Because some part of you believes, at a very deep structural level, that if you just love correctly enough, if you just hold space with enough patience, the dynamic will change. The people will change. The relationship will become what you always believed it could be. This is the emotional recalibration trap. And it keeps empaths locked in phase 2 for years. The trap works like this. You feel the drain of a relationship and interpret the drain as a sign that you haven't given enough, so you give more. And the giving produces, temporarily, a sense of relief, because the person responds warmly, because there is a moment of connection, because it feels like it worked. And that momentary warmth confirms the belief. More giving is the solution. And so the cycle deepens. Not because you are naive, but because your nervous system is receiving real data that is being processed through a framework that was built for a different reality. The framework was built in phase 1, when giving was unlimited, when people felt safe, when openness was all upside. But you are no longer in phase 1. The reality has shifted. The costs are real, and yet the framework hasn't updated. And the gap between your framework and your reality is what phase 2 feels like from the inside. It feels like exhaustion that no amount of sleep repairs. It feels like loving people and resenting them, and at the same time, and hating yourself for the resentment. It feels like isolation inside intimacy, like you are surrounded by people who know you and simultaneously seen by no one. It feels like a constant low-frequency grief for a version of yourself that used to exist, a version that was lighter, that didn't yet know what you now know, that could still open without this faint internal bracing against what the opening would cost. And because all of this is happening internally, because the empathic system processes inward, not outward, no one around you necessarily sees it. You still show up. You still listen. You still hold space. The performance of phase 1 is still running. But behind it, something is quietly shutting down. This is the detachment sequence, beginning its first stage. Not the dramatic detachment of someone who cuts off contact and goes silent. The quiet, preliminary kind. The kind where you start to hold a little bit back, where you answer with slightly less depth, where you are still present in the room, but not quite present in the conversation. People who love you notice something is different, and they ask if you're okay. You say yes, because you are okay. You just aren't what you used to be, and you don't yet have a language for what the difference is. Here's the truth most people miss about phase 2. It is not a breakdown. Even though it feels like one, even though the isolation and the exhaustion and the grief feel exactly like something falling apart. Phase 2 is actually a recalibration that your system is attempting. It is your nervous system, which has been running at an unsustainable threshold for years, trying to negotiate a new operating parameter. trying to figure out how to remain functional without the total openness that has been costing it everything. The problem is that the recalibration doesn't come with instructions. And without a framework for what is happening, most empaths interpret the withdrawal as personal failure. They see themselves pulling back from people, and they diagnose themselves as broken, as cold, as becoming someone they don't want to be. And that self-diagnosis becomes its own trap, because now they are not only managing the original exhaustion, but actively judging themselves for the only response their system knows produce under these conditions. This is where most people get stuck. They oscillate. Open, then pulled back. Giving, then depleted. Connected, then quietly gone. Forward and back, and forward and back. And with each oscillation, the center holds less and less. The identity becomes more fractured. The relationships become more complicated. And the question that was just a whisper in phase 1, who am I when I am not the one who holds everyone? Else together becomes a roar. But what happens next is not collapse. What happens next, for the empaths who survive phase 2, who stay inside the discomfort long enough to move through it rather than around it, is something that cannot be explained until you have lived it. A shift, not violent, not sudden, but irreversible. This is where everything changes. Phase 3 is not what you expect. If you have spent phase 2 grieving the openness of phase 1, if you have spent months or years mourning the person you were before you saw the patterns, before the dynamics became visible, before the cost of caring became undeniable, then you arrive at phase 3 expecting either resolution or resignation. You expect to either find a way back to what you were, or to finally accept that it is gone. But phase 3 is neither. Phase 3 is the identity shift principle in full operation. And the identity shift principle is this: you do not become someone new by choosing to be different. You become someone new by passing through a threshold of experience that makes the old version of you structurally incompatible with your current reality. You don't decide to change. The change happens to you. And then you look back and you cannot find the person you used to be, not because they are lost, but because they belong to a previous stage of an architecture that has since rebuilt itself around something sturdier. Here's what the shift actually looks like from the inside. You stop waiting for people to become what you need them to be. Not because you gave up. Not because you became cynical or cold or decided that people are not worth caring about. But because your system finally disconnected the meaning you were giving to their transformation. You stopped tying your sense of safety to whether they changed, and the moment that wire disconnected, something enormous released. Because here's the truth most people miss about what empaths are actually waiting for in phase 2. They are not waiting for the people to change. They are waiting for the people to change so that the empaths themselves feel safe. The manipulation, and it is a kind of self-manipulation, even if entirely unconscious, is that the empath has made their own internal peace conditional on an external variable they cannot control. And phase 3 is the moment when the conditionality dissolves. Not because the world became safer, but because you stopped needing it to be safe in order to be whole. This distinction matters enormously, because one of the most common misreadings of the empath's phase 3 is that they became selfish, that they pulled back because they stopped caring, that the withdrawal was coldness. And the people in their lives who benefited from phase 1, who were held and carried and understood without being asked, often experience phase 3 as abandonment. They feel the withdrawal. They notice the difference, and they name it as you becoming difficult, distant, different. And here's the truth. They're right that you became different. They're wrong about what the difference means. What they are experiencing as distance is actually the first real boundary your system has ever been able to hold. Not a wall, a boundary. The distinction is structural. A wall is built from pain, from the decision that connection itself is the threat. A boundary is built from clarity, from the understanding that connection is only healthy when it is mutual, when the energy moves in both directions, when the intimacy doesn't require one person to be invisible for the other to feel seen. In phase 1, you didn't have boundaries. You had the illusion of unlimited capacity. In phase 2, you had the beginning of limits, but no architecture for holding them. So they became collisions, misunderstandings, exhaustion. In phase 3, the architecture arrives. And it arrives not as a decision you made, but as a natural consequence of what your system learned in phase 2. This is the power reversal logic, and it is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of the empath's journey. In phase 1, you felt powerful through connection, through being needed, through being the person who could hold space for anyone. In phase 2, that power felt like it was dissolving, because the connection was costing more than it was returning. In phase 3, a different kind of power emerges, quieter, less visible from the outside. The power of someone who knows exactly what they will offer, and to whom and under what conditions, not because they became calculating, but because they finally understand the value of what they carry. The detachment sequence has completed, but it didn't produce a detached person. It produced a discerning one. And this is the difference that most frameworks miss when they talk about empath recovery or healing. They frame the goal as becoming less affected, less sensitive, more protected, as though the empathic gift is a wound that needs to be sealed. But that is not what phase 3 does. Phase 3 does not close the channel. It builds intelligence around it. You are still receiving the signals. You are still deeply aware of the emotional texture of every room you enter, every conversation you have. You still feel people's pain before they speak it. You still carry a depth of perception that most people will spend their entire lives without accessing. But what your system now does with that data is different. You receive it without automatically become responsible for it. You feel someone's pain without converting that feeling into an obligation. You understand what someone needs without making their getting it the measure of your worth. And once this happens, once this becomes not a practice you are maintaining but an organic feature of how you process reality, something extraordinary occurs in the texture of your relationships. The ones built entirely on your willingness to be unlimited begin to fade, slowly, naturally, without drama. Because what held them together was your openness, and your openness is no longer unconditional. And the people who were fed by that unconditionality without offering reciprocity in return find that the relationship no longer works the way it used to, and they leave, or they transform, or they reveal themselves more completely than they ever did before. And the ones that remain, the relationships that survive your phase 3, these are different in quality from anything you experienced in phase 1. Because they are chosen by both people. They are sustained by mutual investment. They are honest in a way that the relationships of phase 1, with all their warmth and depth, never quite were. Because they were constructed partly on your willingness to carry more than your share. But what most people don't realize about phase 3 is that the most profound transformation isn't in the relationships. It's internal. It's the relationship you have with yourself. Because here's what phase 1 actually cost you. Beneath all the exhaustion, beneath all the invisible carrying, it cost you the experience of your own interiority. When you are always attending to others, always feeling the room, always adjusting to the emotional needs of everyone around you, your own inner world becomes quiet by necessity. Not gone, but background. You learn to experience yourself primarily through your effect on others, through their responses to your care, through the warmth in their eyes when you understood them. And over time, this becomes the only mirror you have. Phase 3 restores the other mirror, the one that faces inward, the one that does not require anyone else's presence to function. You start to notice what you feel not as data about the people around you, but as data about yourself. You notice what you want, what you need, what restores you specifically, not what you think should restore you, not what makes you feel like a good person, but what actually returns something to the system that has been running for so long without replenishment. And this is the irreversible part. This is the aspect of phase 3 that cannot be undone even if you tried. Once you have access to your own interior, once you have spent time in the quiet at the center of your own experience without performing care for anyone, without holding space for anyone, without translating anyone else's pain into something manageable, you cannot forget the taste of it. You cannot go back to being fully outward facing without something in you now noticing the cost of that. The phase 2 awareness, the pattern recognition, the visibility of dynamics, all of that remains active. But it is no longer painful the way it was in phase 2. Because in phase 3, you are not fighting the awareness. You are using it. Here's the truth most people miss about what empaths become in phase 3. They do not become less empathic. They become empathic on purpose. They offer the gift where it can be received and honored. They withdraw it where it will only be consumed. And this discernment, which looks like coldness from the outside and feels like clarity from the inside, is not the betrayal of the gift. It is the gift finally being respected by the person who carries it. This is the final architecture, not a destination, because phase 3 is not a place you arrive and stay forever unchanged. Life will still move through you. People will still reach you in places that are tender. You will still sometimes slip back into old patterns. The reflexive overgiving, the quiet self-erasure, the faint ache of needing to be needed. These things do not vanish. They become familiar, recognizable. You see them coming now, where before they would take you completely by surprise. And that recognition, that moment where you feel the old pull and you name it before it names you, that is the difference between an empath lost in the system and an empath who has moved through it completely. And once this happens, you are not the same person you were in phase 1. You are not even the same person who survived phase 2. You are the version of yourself that has been forged by both, that carries the depth of the first and the clarity of the second, and has arrived somewhere that neither of them alone could have produced. You are an empath who is no longer a container for everyone else's experience. You are, for the first time, a home for your own.